My father made me pay for a crime I never committed. I'm going to tell you something that's been buried deep inside me for decades. Something that still feels like a raw wound, even after all these years. It's about a debt I paid, a debt that wasn't mine, a debt that cost me my youth, my dreams, and a piece of my soul. And it was my own father who made me pay it. You see, some families are built on love, on shared laughter, on quiet understanding. Mine was built on silence, on unspoken rules, on a kind of suffocating loyalty that demanded everything and gave nothing back. We lived in a small town, the kind where everyone knew your name, but no one really knew your story. My father, he was a proud man, or at least he tried to be. He ran a small construction business, mostly local jobs, nothing grand, but he carried himself like he was building empires. My mother, she was a shadow, always there, always working, but never truly present.
Her eyes held a sadness that I only understood much later. I was the oldest, the firstborn son. That meant something to my father. It meant I was an extension of him, a vessel for his ambitions, a guarantee of his legacy. I was supposed to be strong, smart, successful, everything he felt he wasn't, or everything he felt the world had denied him. My younger sister, Sarah, she was different. She had a spirit, a fire that I envied. She saw things, she questioned things, but even her fire was slowly dimmed by the heavy air in our house. From a young age, I learned to anticipate, to read the subtle shifts in my father's mood, the way his jaw would tighten, the way his eyes would narrow when a bill came in or when a job didn't go as planned. Money was always tight, a constant, gnawing worry that hung over us like a perpetual storm cloud. My father, he wasn't a bad man in the way some men are. He didn't hit us, not physically.
But his anger, his disappointment, his silent judgment, that was a different kind of violence. It was a slow, steady erosion of your spirit. I remember wanting to go to college. I had dreams, big ones for a kid from a small town. I wanted to study engineering. I wanted to build bridges, not just houses. I spent hours poring over textbooks, sketching designs, imagining a life beyond the dusty roads and the endless struggle. My grades were good. My teachers encouraged me. I even got a partial scholarship. It felt like a lifeline, a way out. Then came the summer I turned 18. The summer everything changed. My father had taken on a big project, bigger than anything he'd done before, a commercial building in the next county. He'd poured everything into it, every penny we had, every loan he could secure. He was convinced this was his breakthrough, his chance to finally prove himself. He talked about it constantly, his eyes alight with a feverish hope I'd rarely.
He even had me working on the site, carrying lumber, mixing cement, learning the ropes. I didn't mind. I thought I was helping. I thought I was contributing to our future. But the project went south fast. There were delays, material shortages, unexpected costs. My father, in his pride and his desperation, had cut corners. He'd signed contracts he didn't fully understand. He'd trusted the wrong people. And then, one sweltering August afternoon, the whole thing collapsed. Not literally, thank God, but financially. The client pulled out. The bank called in the loans, and my father was left with a mountain of debt, a half-finished building, and a ruined reputation. I remember the day the lawyers came. They sat in our living room, their voices low and serious, talking about liens and foreclosures and bankruptcy. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her face pale. Sarah was hiding in her room, and my father, he was a ghost.
His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated stare. Then the lawyer said something that made my blood run cold. He mentioned a specific clause in one of the contracts, a clause that my father, in his haste, had overlooked. It stated that if the primary contractor defaulted, and if a certain amount of work had been done by a named apprentice, that apprentice could be held partially liable for some of the costs, especially if they had signed off on certain material receipts or work logs. My father had made me sign those logs. He told me it was just routine, part of learning the business. I was 18, barely out of high school, eager to please. I signed wherever he told me to. The lawyer looked at me. "You signed these, didn't you, son?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. My father, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke. His voice was rough but clear. He was involved. He was my right hand. He knew what he was doing. It was a lie, a blatant, cruel lie.
I knew nothing. I was a kid, following orders. But in that moment, under the weight of his gaze, under the silent accusation in the room, I couldn't speak. I couldn't defend myself. My mother didn't say a word. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with that familiar, helpless sadness. The lawyers left. The silence in the house was deafening. My father went to his study, slamming the door. My mother started doing dishes, the clinking of plates the only sound. I stood there, frozen. The words, "He knew what he was doing," echoing in my head. Later that night, my father called me into his study. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and desperation. He didn't look at me directly. He just stared out the window, his back to me. "Son," he said, his voice low, "we're in a bad way, a very bad way." I waited. My heart was pounding. This mistake," he continued, "it's going to ruin us. Everything we've worked for, everything I've built." He paused, then turned to face me.
His eyes were head-rimmed, but hard. "But there's a way to save the house, to save your mother, to save Sarah." He laid out the plan. The lawyers had suggested that if I, as the apprentice who had signed those documents, took on a significant portion of the debt, it could mitigate some of the immediate legal action against his personal assets. It would mean I wouldn't go to college. It would mean I'd have to work immediately to start paying it off. He had already found me a job, a grueling one, at the local mill. Long hours, low pay, but steady. "It's your responsibility now," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were part of this. You signed those papers. You have to make it right." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him he was a liar, a coward. I wanted to tell him I was 18, that I had dreams, that this wasn't fair. But the words caught in my throat. I looked at his defeated face, at the lines of worry etched deep around his eyes.
I thought of my mother, her silent suffering. I thought of Sarah, still a child, needing a home, needing stability. And I said nothing. I just nodded.
That was the moment. That was the emotional climax. The moment I accepted the burden. The moment I let my father pin his failure on me. The moment I signed away my future for a crime I never committed. I walked out of that study a different person. The boy with dreams of building bridges was gone. In his place was a young man carrying a weight that wasn't his, a bitterness that would fester for years. The next morning, I started at the mill. The work was brutal. 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The noise was deafening, the air thick with sawdust and the smell of hot metal. My hands became calloused, my back ached constantly. Every paycheck, a significant portion went directly to the lawyers, to the bank, to pay off my father's mistake. He never once offered to help. He never once said thank you.
He just watched silently as I toiled. My college acceptance letter arrived a few weeks later. I tore it up without opening it. I couldn't bear to read the words, to see the future I had lost. The psychological and emotional consequences were devastating. I became a shell of myself. The anger was a constant companion, a burning coal in my gut. I resented my father with a ferocity that scared me. I resented my mother for her silence, for not defending me, for letting it happen. I resented Sarah, who, oblivious in her youth, still got to dream. I saw my friends go off to college, start their lives, chase their ambitions. I watched them from a distance, a prisoner of my own making, bound by a debt that wasn't mine. I stopped laughing. I stopped dreaming. I just worked. And I paid. Years blurred into a monotonous cycle of work, sleep, and sleep.
How could I explain to anyone that my life had been stolen, not by some external force, but by the very man who was supposed to protect me? How could I trust anyone when my own family had betrayed me so profoundly? My father, he never recovered his business. He never truly recovered his pride. He just faded, slowly, into a quiet, defeated man. He spent his days watching television, drinking cheap beer, never acknowledging the sacrifice I was making, never acknowledging the lie he had told. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? I never knew. He never spoke of it, and I, in my stubborn pride and pain, never asked. My mother, she tried in her own quiet way. She'd leave me a hot meal after a long shift, or mend my work clothes. But the words of comfort, of apology, of understanding, they never came. She was trapped in her own silence, her own sorrow. Sarah, she eventually left.
She went to my state university, far away. She visited sometimes, but our conversations were always superficial. We never talked about the elephant in the room, the unspoken truth that had fractured our family. I think she knew deep down, but like my mother, she chose silence. It took me almost 15 years to pay off that debt. 15 years of my life gone. By the time the last payment was made, I was in my mid-30s. My youth was behind me.
My dreams were long dead. I had a steady job at the mill, a small house I'd bought with my meager savings, and a heart full of scars. My father died a few years after that. He had a stroke. He lingered for a few weeks, a shadow of a man, unable to speak. I sat by his bedside, watching him, and I waited for some sign, some word, some flicker of recognition, of remorse. But there was nothing, just the slow, steady decline. He died without ever acknowledging what he had done, without ever asking for forgiveness.
I stood at his funeral, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. No grief, no relief, just the echo, the life unlived. My mother passed away a few years after him. She just gave up. Her sadness finally consumed her. I held her hand as she went, and I whispered, "It's okay, Mom. You can rest now." And for the first time, I felt a pang of something akin to pity for her. She had been a victim too, in her own way, a victim of her own silence, her own inability to fight. It's only now, looking back, from the vantage point of an older man, that I can begin to untangle it all. The deep reflection on what was learned from the pain, it's a long, slow process. I learned that silence is a powerful weapon. It allows injustice to fester. It allows lies to become truth. My father's silence, my mother's silence, my own silence, it all contributed to the tragedy. If I had spoken up, if I had fought, if I had refused to carry that burden.
But I was a child, caught in a web of loyalty and fear. I learned that family, for all its supposed unconditional love, can be the source of your deepest wounds. The betrayal from within, from the people who are supposed to protect you, that cuts deeper than any external enemy. It shatters your trust in the very foundation of your world. I learned about the insidious nature of emotional abuse. My father never laid a hand on me, but he broke my spirit. He stole my future. He made me believe for a long time that I was responsible for his failures, that I owed him my life. That kind of manipulation, that constant weight of blame, it's a poison that seeps into every corner of your being. But I also learned about survival, about resilience. I paid the debt, I carried the burden, and I didn't break. I didn't turn into him. I didn't become bitter and resentful to everyone around me. It was a close call sometimes. The anger almost consumed me.
But somewhere, deep down, a flicker of that boy who wanted to build bridges still remained. I never married, never had children. I couldn't bring myself to trust anyone enough to risk inflicting my own scars on another generation. That's a regret I carry, a quiet ache that never fully goes away. But I found other ways to live. I found solace in my work, in the quiet rhythm of the mill. I found peace in solitude, in long walks in the woods, in the simple beauty of a sunrise. I eventually left the mill. I saved enough to buy a small piece of land, and I built a cabin with my own hands. Not a bridge, not an empire, but a home, a place of my own, built on my own terms, free from the shadows of the past.
It's a small victory, perhaps, but it's mine. So, what's the message in all this? What do I want you to take from my story? It's this. Don't let anyone, not even your own family, make you pay for a crime you didn't commit. Don't let their failures become your burden.
Your life, your dreams, your future, they are yours alone. Protect them fiercely. Speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. Set boundaries, even when it feels like you're betraying loyalty. Because true loyalty is not about blind obedience, it's about mutual respect and love. And if you find yourself carrying a weight that isn't yours, a blame that doesn't belong to you, know that you have the power to put it down. It won't be easy, it will be painful, but it's the only way to reclaim your life, to heal your spirit, to finally be free. I paid the debt, I survived, and now I'm telling my story, not for revenge, not for pity, but because the truth, finally spoken, is the only real freedom I have left.
And maybe, just maybe, it can help someone else find theirs.